In 1996, Sony Computer Entertainment published a game by Naughty Dog called Crash Bandicoot. Players followed the intrepid hero through jungle traps, secret tombs, balderdashes, across rivers filled with bandicoot-eating piranhas, and over treacherous rope bridges populated by pigs for some reason. His goal: to rescue his girlfriend from the evil clutches of the infamous Dr. Neo Cortex. With this video we take all of that and we throw most of it away. We focus on one vital element that still makes Crash Bandicoot such a great game to play today. It's traps.
Hi everyone and welcome to this Valkyrie Sound tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to use Unreal Engine to create two types of trap based on the traps used in the game Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot's traps were a blend of visual and oral cues, encouraging a sense of timing and rhythm. The two traps that we're going to make are a squashing hammer and a tricky ledge. And we're going to use two different methods for our animations. We're going to use Blender and blueprints. And that means that we're going to use two different methods for applying audio to these animations. For the Blender animations, we're going to use Anim Notifies in Unreal Engine, and we'll use a sound cue for the blueprint animation. We're taking Unreal Engine's template side scroller, and I just want to take a moment to thank Cobra Hawk for suggesting making videos based on the templates in Unreal Engine. It's a really good idea. So this is what the side scroller template looks like when you first open it up, and this is what it looks like after a few changes. The assets I'm using here I bought from Cindy Studios. This is not a sponsored video, but if you're interested, that's where they're from. They're the Simple Temple and the Polygon Dungeons packs. If you don't need them, you can use the simple shapes, the cubes, the sphere, so on, that comes with Unreal Engine and use those as placeholders. You can create your own audio by sourcing them from places like freesound.org or recording things around the house. So I started out by creating the animations and then applying the sounds afterwards. That allowed me to focus on getting the traps animated in a particular way before I turned to the audio. I added an amount of floppiness to the animations just to make them feel a little more cartoony, and I added some visual cues to signal to the player that they don't really want to hang around. Coupled with the audio cues, that should help the player develop a sense of when disaster is about to strike. To start with, we need a hammer asset. If you don't have one, you could use this, or you could lash together a couple of shapes to make a placeholder. We're going to create a new actor blueprint by right-clicking in the content browser, blueprint class, and then actor, and drag your asset, your hammer asset, into that. And if we have a look at this in simulation mode, in our event graph, we've got the event begin play node, and that runs into a sequence node with the lower exec pin running out to control the lift of the pebbles. For the hammer though, we're going to add a timeline node, which we'll come back to in a moment. Take a reference to your asset and drag that into the graph, and then from that we want the set relative rotation node. And you want to right click on the new rotation to split that pin, and that'll give you the three floats here. Again, we'll come back to that. You can see that's linked up to the timeline. Do that in a moment. From the set relative rotation node, we're going to add a do once node. And then we're going to add a spawn sound at location node to that. Now I had better success with the spawn sound at location node than I did with the play sound at location node, which didn't always trigger the audio on the first instance, on the first animation instance. I'm really not sure why that is. If you know why that might be, it'd be great if you could leave a comment below. And you can see I've attached this, the location pin there, to the default scene root world location. This is then attached to a delay node, and the completed exec pin of that delay node runs to our reset node, reset input of the do once node. You can see as well we've got 6.5 as a duration here, and that's going to match with the length of the timeline, how long it takes for the hammer to fall and then rise back to its start position. There's another way that you can get that value though, if you were using a timeline that might have some variability to its duration. So now the timeline here for the hammer is called hammer smash. Oops. So if I type in hammer smash and we get that timeline, we can then drag off from that and we can get the timeline length, and we can plug that into the duration input instead. And that's useful if perhaps you're adjusting the timeline length and you don't have to keep fiddling on, or you don't have to keep remembering to change the delay duration. And now for the animation itself. Double click on the timeline and you can see here that I have added a float track, and that's because we've broken down our rotation to 3 input pins, the X, Y and Z values. If we have a look at the asset, the hammer here, you can see that I'm rotating this one on the X axis. Now depending on the asset that you're using and how you want to orientate it, you may find that you're changing the Y or the Z axis. What I've established here is a start position. So my timeline is going to start at 45 and the last keyframe is going to be 45 as well. Here we have 45 and 45. Here it's dropping down a little bit before it pulls back, and then it sinks all the way down to the bottom quite quickly. We've only got a 0.15 second travel time there, and then it gradually starts to ratchet back up in steps, getting a more mechanical motion. So if we simulate this, now I won't go through each individual keyframe on this timeline. The animation that I have here might be different to the animation that you want. So now that you've mapped out your timeline, go back to your event graph, line up that output of the float to the X, Y or Z inputs for the set relative rotation of your asset. We can compile and save that. So with the animation completed, let's move on to the audio. So for this, we're going to create our cue. And for that, we are right-clicking in the content browser, sounds, and then sound cue. And here's one I prepared earlier. So you can see that I've broken it down into 4 sections here, and you can see a lot of delay nodes as well. This is why I sorted out the animations in advance, so that I knew exactly when I wanted my sounds to play. So at the top here we have the audio cue section. Just like we have a visual cue, that little wobble before the hammer falls, this is the audio cue to accompany that. And then moving from there we have the swipe, and we have the impact sounds here. Next, because the impact sound on its own was good, but there was a gap between the impact sound and the first ratchet. So I needed an extra sound to fill that space. It sounded weird without it. I'll show you that in a moment. So I've added this sound, which is basically effectively a reverb to the impact sound, basically just to fill out the animation. And lastly, we have our ratcheting section here. Now you can see it's just the same sound with different variable delays, a delay of 3 seconds, 3.5, 4 seconds, 4.5. And if we go back to our timeline in the hammer trap blueprint, you can see that this is lined up with the start value of each of these sections here. And if we have a look at the mixer node in the sound cue, pay attention to the ratcheting section here, which starts at 5. We're getting a cheap attenuation effect here, because as the hammer rises up, it's moving further away from the player. So we are artificially creating that by just reducing the volume a little bit, so it sounds like the hammer is getting further away, or that the ratcheting of the hammer is getting further away. Let's try and have a look at this with and without this sound in here, and you'll see why I decided to add something in. Okay, and now we'll take that reverb sound away. And while it's serviceable, certainly is usable as that, it just lacks, for me, it just lacks a little bit of extra oomph. We're in a tomb, so I'm conscious of the environment and the sense of environment that I'm trying to create for the player as well. It's an indoor space. I want that sound to reverberate around the whole space, but I don't necessarily want to have to use a reverberation volume. We can apply a sound that has a little bit of reverb of its own, but in such a way that it creates a reverb for our main impact sound. Now for this sound, this is just a standard sound. You can see it's a similar one, actually it's the exact same one that we used as the audio cue as part of that setup, but I'm using the modulator node to pitch it down. We've got the pitch min and max equal to -1 here, which I believe makes it go down by 12 semitones. So that takes it down an octave. So the sound shifted down sounds like this, which gives us our reverberation. So now that we've set up our sound, we save that, we hit browse, and then with that selected we go back to our hammer trapper blueprint, back to the event graph, and in our spawn sound at location node, tap the little arrow to load it in there. Lower down you can see that I've got an attenuation setting applied here, the sound attenuation piranha, because I was using this one for the jumping fish. If we have a look at that, attenuation applied to the sound. You can see first of all that this is quite a large box. It goes much further back than our actual level extends. Now obviously it doesn't necessarily need to be as long as that, but it gives us some scope if we needed to move things around, especially if we want to reuse assets within the level and we are flipping their orientation. One thing I also found about using attenuation in this side-scroller setup is that sphere attenuation felt a little bit inappropriate. But the squares allow me to more easily see the visual effect of the attenuation, the tail off of the sound. It might be a personal thing, but I also found it easier to adjust the attenuation settings when I was using the square setup rather than using the sphere. And that's really just because of the way it looks when you're looking at it from the front. So let's have a look at that finished in simulation mode. Now we are going to get sounds from the other traps around this hammer, but let's have a look and see what it looks like here. We've looked at applying sounds to animations that are driven by a blueprint. What about something that's more like the character animation blueprint that lets us trigger sounds using Anim Notifies? Well, for this bit, you'll need Blender. I'm using the coffin lid asset from Cindy Studios' Simple Temple Pack, but you can use any simple mesh. Now, because I'm fairly new to Blender, these next few steps might feel a little rough. First, we're going to export the static mesh that we want to animate. So we browse to it, we right click, Asset Actions, and then we're going to click on Export, and you'll put it in the place that you want it to live. Unreal Engine 4 will export that as an FBX file, and when we open Blender, we have the option to import an FBX format. So we want to go File, Import FBX, find it in the location that you exported it from UE4 to, and this is what you'll have. You might need to delete the standard cube that comes as part of the general template in Blender's file. Across the top, you've got these differently named sections, differently named tabs. Select the Animation tab, then select the asset. You can see I've got my keyframes already set up down here. We are currently in the Object mode, which is this section here, Object mode. Hit I on the keyboard, and that allows us to insert a keyframe and select location. And now it's stored a new keyframe here at this point, at this location. So I'm actually going to delete that because I don't want that one. Oops. If you don't get this tab on the side, you can hit N and that should make it show. And what you can do is you can adjust the values in here. And as you do that, you can see that it's adding a new keyframe on our timeline down below. To remove a keyframe, select it and press delete on your keyboard. That only seems to work when your mouse cursor is in the lower section here, when it's in the timeline section. To edit a keyframe, you just select it and you change its values, so long as the timeline cursor is over it. Down in the lower right, you can set a limit on the number of frames you need for your animation sequence. The default for this, I think, is 250. For this asset, I've set it to 74. And Blender will loop around between 0 and 74 indefinitely. Anyhow, once you're happy with everything, click on File, Export FBX, and write it to the location of your choice. Once you've exported your file, we're going to grab that FBX file on our computer browser and we're going to drag it and drop it into the appropriate folder in your UE4 content browser. And now we'll get the FBX import options display. So we're importing a skeletal mesh, as you can see here. If you scroll down to the animation section, you can see that yes, we are going to import animations. And here we can select either to import by the exported time, that's the duration of the animation sequence as it was in Blender, the animated time, which I believe will import all the active keyframes but only keyframes, and then we have the set range, which allows us to define how much of the animation we want to import. So we're going to leave this as exported time. Now import all, and now we have some new assets. We have our ledge skeletal mesh, we've got our ledge animation sequence, we have a physics asset, and we have a skeleton for a coffin lid. So when I've run through my imports, the physics asset was applying a collision area totally unrelated to the shape and size of the skeletal mesh. So we can delete that. We're going to add a box and generate all bodies. I needed to adjust the scale of this box to stop the player from looking like they were hovering over it. And then we can save and we can close the physics asset. Next, open up the animation sequence. And here you should see your animated coffin lid or ledge moving around on the screen. Now you can see my animation looks a bit fast here, and that's because I clumped my keyframes too close together in Blender. So there are two ways to fix this. Either you can redefine the keyframes in Blender and re-import, or you can adjust the rate scale in Unreal Engine 4 on the left here. Under the animation tab, I'm going to put this down to 0.4. That makes the animation sequence in this case look a lot cleaner. We want additional functionality before we can apply our sounds. We want to be able to adjust this trap so that all the traps aren't starting at the same point in their animation sequence. We want the player to be able to jump up higher and higher using these ledges without them all retracting into the wall at the same time. So we'll create a new actor blueprint and we'll drag and drop the skeletal mesh, the pink one, into it as a component, which is what I've done here. In the event graph, drag in a reference to the skeletal mesh, and from there, add the set pause anims node, and hook that up to the event begin play node. This first instance is going to be ticked yes. Then we're going to add a delay node, and to that we're going to add a customizable initial animation pause, which is a float, which is editable, so we can access it within the level, hook that up to the duration, and then we are going to add another reference from the ledge to the pause anims set node, and that one is going to be unticked for false. So this obviously allows us to delay when the animation starts based on a value of our choice. For something a little more sophisticated, you could attach other triggers like overlaps or other in-game events, perhaps exposing secret passageways in our deadly tomb depending on the actions the player makes. Now we can drop this blueprint into our level and set the delay so we can craft a climbable structure for the player to navigate. So now that we've set up a blueprint to manage when the animation is going to start, we need to add our sound. So here I have my extract, my retract, and my wobble Anim Notifies. If we go to the content browser, we want to right click on our skeletal mesh, create Anim Blueprint. Here we have the Anim Notifies for our audio, and here they are referenced in the event graph. So the extract, retract, and our two wobbles referenced in the event graph, hooked up to play sound at location nodes. I'm using the same sound for the extract and retract for the sound of the ledge going in and out, and I'm using the same sound for both of the wobbles. We have an attenuation setting, which is also a box setting, just like the hammer one. You can see that it's shorter, and that's because if we have a look at the layout of this part of the map, we can see that we have ledges that would effectively overlap one another if we used the huge attenuation that we used for the hammer. And we also want the player to be orally aware of the traps as they navigate this part of the map, and partly that's to help with a sense of timing. And if we go back to our NMBP, you can see that we've got a reference to a world location here. Despite all my research, there doesn't seem to be any way for the animation blueprint to use the get world or get local location or transform data from within itself. But by sheer chance, we've already added our ledge to an actor blueprint. So we use this to make a one-off cast in the Anim blueprint at the start of the game to get the instance blueprint's world location, and then we can use that to set the location for our sound. Simple. So here we have our event blueprint initialize animation, and from there we're going to cast to our ledge blueprint. The object here is get owning actor. From the cast node we're going to get our default scene root, and from there we'll get the get world location. Right click that return value output and select promote to variable, and then hook that set node up to the cast node. And now we can take that ledge blueprint, drop it into a level, adjust the initial anim pause, and we're off. You can see that there's a pattern to the way that the ledges are moving, which allows the player to be able to advance and jump across. If we click on this asset here, you can see that I've set the initial anim pause for that one to 2 seconds. Here we have 0, here we have 0.1. A quick note on the reason behind that: if you've got two ledges that are close enough that their attenuation shapes can overlap, you might get doubled volume. So the best solution is to slightly offset one of the animations, if it's possible, using the custom variable in the ledge blueprint. Another alternative might be to adjust the attenuation size itself, adjust the shape of the attenuation, or to introduce some modulation to the animation audio. And that's it. 2 methods of applying sounds to animated traps in a side-scrolling adventure tomb raiding Crash Bandicooting Prince of Super Mario landing game. All in all, if it was just me making my own game, I think I prefer to use blueprints to move the hammers and saws and the various paraphernalia of death that deadly tombs are so often equipped with these days. If I was part of a team, however, receiving animations in finalized form and I was asked to put the sounds to those, then Anim Notifies are a very easy way to handle the audio. And you still have the same functionality if you add the animated asset to a dedicated blueprint. So, on balance, it probably comes down to personal preference and whether or not you're working solo or as part of a team, and if there's an established process governing how audio is applied to animation. That's all for now. Take care, thanks for watching, and good luck with your own projects.